why the compromises at the Constitutional Convention? Well, when we think about the Constitutional Convention, we think about like the high school compromises. We think big state, small state. We think national government versus the state governments, and those were really fundamental. But we don't talk enough about the compromises on slavery because they were quieter, because they were just bubbling under the surface. But they were equally as fundamental because this was the walkaway issue for the South. So to put this in perspective, let's go to a quote from John Rutledge. John Rutledge was a delegate at the Constitutional Convention from South Carolina, former governor of that state, and a future Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He'll say, "Religion and humanity had nothing to do with this question. Interest alone is the governing principle with nations. The true question at present is whether the South shall or shall not be parties to the Union." Oh, okay, so this is the walkaway issue for the South. If the North pushes this issue, the South just goes away. And this is going to be decided in three key issues, three key compromises at the convention. Before I start there, we have to first acknowledge that the word slavery isn't found in the Constitution. And this was a really intentional omission because if you put the word slave in the Constitution, then it has some kind of constitutional foundation to it. It's much harder to eradicate it. So it's an intentional omission. So when you're looking for these slavery compromises, you've got to look for key words. Instead of slave, you've got to look for person held to service or labor or escaped person. You're not looking for slave, which makes it harder to find in the original Constitution. Okay, so first compromise. How do you count enslaved persons for the purposes of representation in the House of Representatives and also in the Electoral College, which is how you decide who becomes president? And the South says we'd like them to count as whole people, not because we intend to treat them as people or as anything less than property, but because we'd like more power in the House and in determining who becomes president. And the North says, either they're property and they count as zero, or they're full people and they're treated as full people. So they were rooting for zero. And the compromise is 3/5. Second question. What do you do about importation of slaves? Does Congress have the power to ban the importation of slaves? And again, this is a compromise. The answer is yes, but not until 1808. So you've got just over 20 years to continue importing slaves. Next question. What do you do about escaped persons, slaves? Well, this is the Fugitive Slave Compromise. Basically, escaped persons who escape into free states cannot become free and citizens under the laws of that free state and must be returned by the free state to the slave state. Okay, so these are the three big compromises. And again, this is about economics and about political power. This isn't a moral question yet. No one is arguing that slavery is a positive good yet. That's going to come in the 1830s and 1840s, but it's not there yet. Right now, slavery is at best a necessary evil. It's an economic institution, which many hope will just kind of go away at some point, but they're not really going to push it that direction yet. So how do we judge these compromises? Was this an agreement with hell, a pact with the devil himself, as William Lloyd Garrison, that famous abolitionist, will argue? Or was this necessary scaffolding to be removed as soon as possible from a fundamentally anti-slavery constitution, as Frederick Douglass will argue? Either way, however you interpret this, we have to admit that the compromises happened and that they had really serious repercussions, that these compromises condemned several generations, several million people for nearly 100 more years to enslavement. But that these compromises also made possible our national construction. There is no union, there is no constitution without these slavery compromises. So that's the incongruence, that's the contradiction at the heart of the American founding. We're a nation founded on the Declaration of Independence, on the idea of the natural equality of mankind, and yet slavery and compromises on slavery made our national construction possible. So we have to look this in the eye to understand ourselves as a people and to understand the Civil War.